And so to start off with, if you're going to write what you know, just start writing. Like, don't overthink it. This doesn't need to be your Pulitzer winner. This doesn't need to be your New York Times bestseller. You can just sit at your laptop and type. And if what comes out is really bad, that's fine. Sometimes you just have to write really bad stuff before you get to the good stuff. But just let yourself write and don't necessarily map out every single thing. Leave a little room for that writing what you know magic to appear. So Abby and her sisters also live in northern Wisconsin. I actually don't live in northern Wisconsin. I live outside Milwaukee and I'm from Madison. But right now I'm in my parents' cabin home up in Boulder Junction, which is in the Northwoods. And so it was really great because I got to incorporate a lot of this town that I really love. Even though I'm not from there, I was able to pull out really unique things about this small town. And as a kid, I was always like, I was kind of down on Wisconsin, if you haven't gotten that yet, like I thought it was a boring place to live. I just couldn't imagine why a grown-up who could go anywhere would live in a place like the Midwest when you could live in a place like New York City or something. But now when I really look around, I realize how fascinating a place Wisconsin is. It's very diverse in both people and landscape. It's got extremely kind people. There's so much different wildlife. And I just really started to fall in love with the state that I'm from and still live in. And I wanted to, when I wrote the book, write about people who live in this resort town, this vacation area year round. Now, again, like I don't live there, so that may not seem like writing what you know, but it was a place that I loved. And so think about in your own life, what things really sing to your heart, like what, when you're doing it, really makes you feel alive, or when you go to a certain place, you just really light up while you're there. It doesn't have to be your hometown or the thing you do every day. It could be somewhere that you travel to once in a while, but that's still writing what you know because you have this sense of being there. And so I wrote about a resort town. I renamed Boulder Junction so that I could mess around with landmarks a little bit. And this really is a magical place, that very special, ordinary, everyday kind of magic. Again, I think that's the most important kind because it's real. So, by spending time here and paying attention and having conversations with people, I was able to really bring out a lot of things about this small town. So thirdly, in the book, there's a big element of a feeling of helplessness. Again, I've never had a sibling go to inpatient treatment before, but Abby in the book has to go through that when her oldest sister Blair is sent to treatment for anorexia. And Abby feels extremely helpless, right? She wants to help her sister, but she can't because you can't control another person's mental illness. You can be there for them, but you can't force them to change. You can't force them to want to heal. You can't force them to take medication. You really lose a lot of that power. And we've all had that situation where we have been desperate to change something and we just can't. And that makes us feel helpless. There's people in our lives that we want to help. We want to see them on a different path. They're going in a direction that we don't think is great, or they're living in a way that we don't think is right. Who hasn't been in that situation, right? Where you just feel so desperate to help someone and you can't. That helplessness was able to really come through with me for Abby, even though I hadn't been in that exact situation. So think about a time in your own life where you felt a really strong emotion that feels kind of universal. Like I said, like everyone has felt helpless. Everyone has had times in their life where they didn't know how they were going to get out of bed. I don't care how old you are. You've had those days. And so thinking of a feeling that you've had that's really universal that you can bring out in your story is a way of writing what you know, even if the specific scenario in the book isn't something that you've necessarily been through. So just to reiterate those kind of writing what you know tips, first of all, Don't overthink it. Just sit down and write. It's allowed to be bad. It's fine. No one's going to read it. Give it a fake name if you have to. Sometimes I do that on Microsoft Word because I'm like, if I get in a car crash and someone finds my laptop, I don't want them to read my crappy writing. So just first of all, don't overthink it. Second of all, think of setting and location. Where are you when it just lights you up? Like, what's a place that you love to go? And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be Paris. It doesn't have to be Disney World. It can be northern Wisconsin, which sounds pretty boring to some people, but if you've been there, you know how magical it is. And the third is to think of an emotion that you have felt deeply before that you feel is really universal, that you want to pour into your story. There was also small things throughout the book where I was able to write what I know that were really fun. Like the main character, Abby, loves Star Wars. So do I. And it's not just like, oh, we've seen the movies, but it's like, we watch the TV shows, like we follow it, we know what's going on. And it was really fun to be able to put in a lot of little Star Wars references in there, because I don't think there's a ton of books where the main character is a girl and like Star Wars, which isn't very fair. And Abby has a big Norwegian elk hound for a dog. Those are my favorite types of dogs. They're super big and fluffy. So I was able to sneak that in there. And she has some friend drama. You know, it wouldn't really be a book about a 12-year-old girl if there wasn't some friend dynamics, since that's such a powerful part of being a preteen. It's something that's so overbearing. And so I was able to use experiences from my real life and really put them in Abby's shoes as she goes through that drama with her friends. So you can also write what you know by doing these really small things. And that also saves you time because you can do less research. You know, if you really know the dog breed that your character has, then you don't have to like go learn all about this other kind of dog. So it's a good time saver too. Now, there's also, of course, things I didn't know that I was able to put in the book. And that's really fun too. You know, so I guess I would take that advice of write what you know and add a little asterisk. I would say write what you know and what you love. Because if there's something that you're very passionate about, but you don't really know about, it can really be fun to research. So in the book, Abby's older sister, Blair, is a ballerina, and that's kind of where she ends up getting really manipulated with her weight, and she ends up falling victim to anorexia. Now, I really don't know anything about ballet. I took ballet for 1 year when I was 4, and then told my mom that I was too stressed out when I was 4 and had to quit. I was such a weird child. But I love ballet and I love to watch it. My husband and I go to the Nutcracker almost every year. I am very fascinated by the entire culture. I like to watch documentaries about it. And so although I'm not in the world of ballet, it was really fun for me to get to do that specific research and talk to professional ballerinas and learn about what it's like to be a kid who's trying to become a professional dancer. I mean, that's really not easy. And so I was able to dive into that. And so I think it's not just necessarily writing what you know, it can also be writing what you love. So I'm going to read a little portion of what happens next. But before I do that, I just kind of wanted to sum this up by saying, writing what you know isn't boring. I wish I could go back and tell my little 3rd grade self that writing what you know does not have to be this dull thing. It creates some of the best literature of our time. When I was growing up, one of my favorite books was Bloomability by Sharon Creech. And all that book is really about is a girl like going to boarding school in Switzerland. Like not that much happens. It's just basically about this girl's life changing. But that came from Sharon Creech's time living in Switzerland. She was able to use that life experience to write a book that in many ways shaped my childhood. I read that book so often it fell apart. It was so meaningful to me. And it was just from her life experience that she was able to do that. Or think of a more modern example would be The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. She really based a lot of the town that book takes place in the town she grew up in. And again, it's like a small town in Mississippi. It doesn't really sound that fascinating, but she was able to see that everyday magic, those everyday interactions between people and how powerful and meaningful they could be. And she used that experience to write a book that, again, literally changed people's lives. And so when I say write what you know, it's not just because it's the easy way out. It's because your specific life experience could be a way to help someone else. And if you spend too much time thinking that like your life is boring and you need to go write about like a time traveling wizard who lives in Tokyo because your life is too dull, you're missing out on a chance to maybe serve and help a lot of people through your own really meaningful experience. So I'm going to read just a couple pages of what happens next. It's not going to be boring. You know, when you go to author readings and they like awkwardly read at the front of the room, it's short. But I just wanted to give you a little preview if you haven't gotten your hands on the book yet. And then I'm going to open it up to some questions. So maybe while I'm reading, just think in your head if there's any questions that you want to put in the chat box. So this is just the beginning. I'm just going to read the first 2 pages. The night I saw Dr. Leo Lacamoire, I was looking at the stars. Abby, did you take my sweatshirt? Lyra, the liar. That's a fancy word for harp. Sagittarius, the archer. Abby, I know you can hear me. Sweatshirt, now. Scorpius, the scorpion. That one was always tricky. Abby. Just as I located Delphinius, the dolphin, my sister burst into the attic, her hair falling out of her ponytail and into her eyes. I'm going to be late to work if I don't leave 5 minutes ago, and I know you stole that sweatshirt. Jade was 16, 4 years older than me. She had blonde hair with a purple streak and some boy's number scribbled on her palm. She popped popcorn at the movie theater 3 nights a week. I don't have your stupid sweatshirt. I did. You do. Jade could read my mind, or it was obvious. She was used to me being a liar. That's important to remember. Sometimes I'm a liar. It's cold out, I whined. Dad and I are going to the park tonight. I don't care if you're going to see Harry Styles. It's my uniform. The movie theater jacked the air conditioning up so high, all the employees got thick fleeces to wear. I was always stealing Jade's and her scarves and her eyeliner and anything else I could swipe. It was my sisterly duty, really. It's in my closet, I grumbled, and she stomped out. Jade and I shared a bedroom, which was half the reason I spent most of the time in the attic. The other half was the stars. My oldest sister, Blair, used to have her own room. Now it was empty. I didn't have to steal from her. She just let me borrow stuff. Jade would have kept a padlock on her closet if Mom let her. Jade again. Dad says if you want to go, you need to get your butt downstairs. He's tired. I peered into the telescope once more to get one last glance at Delphinius, but my elbow had hit my telescope while I turned to talk to Jade. Instead of pointing me toward the night sky, it had swung down to Eagle's Nest, one of the nicest cabins my parents owned. It was right across the street from our house, so I didn't see the cluster of stars that someone had at one point thought resembled a sea creature. I saw one of the brightest stars in the entire universe, Dr. Leo Lacamoire himself, staring out across the lake that went on for miles. But I didn't yet know that it was Dr. Leo Lacamoire. I didn't know why his gaze was fixed out on the water. I only knew that he looked like a man a little older than my dad, with a scratchy beard and pasty skin. I only knew that he seemed incredibly sad, and that now he was looking at me. I ducked like a total idiot. Crap, not good, not good, not good. I wasn't trying to be a snoop, but I clearly had a telescope pointed at the guy's cabin. He was going to call the office and report a 12-year-old creeper, and my mom would kill me. Our family owned Camp McCourt, a bunch of cabins, a bar, and a dock in Moose Junction, Wisconsin. Tourists came from all over the Midwest to hunt, fish, and see the stars at night. We'd had a few famous people visit over the years. The governor, some guy who'd been in a handful of cheese commercials, the couple that owned 82 frozen custard spots around the country who'd fought louder than firecrackers all weekend. But our fanciest guest stayed in Eagle's Nest. It had satellite TV and heated floors. Dr. Leo Lacamoire had chosen it online. Reading all the reviews and details and photos, he had picked Camp McCourt over Paul Bunyan's across the lake, or Cubby Lodge, which had great breakfasts, but no direct lake access. He had looked up the cabins on Google Earth, checking out the views to find out from where he could best see the live. Nope, we're not at that part of the story yet. So I didn't know what Dr. Leo Lacamoire was looking at, not that night. I only knew that there was a man in Eagle's Nest who'd seen me spying, and I only knew my butt was fried if my mom found out. But I also knew that there was something about his face, that total and utter look of sadness and despair that I had seen before. I crept back up to the window as slowly as possible. Dr. Leo Lacamoire, Then just some guy, one whose name I didn't know and thought I never would, was not looking at me anymore. He wasn't looking at the lake either. He was staring at the sky. So that's just a little snippet of what happens next. Thanks for letting my actress come out. I did theater as a kid and I never get to like read aloud dramatically anymore. But so that's what I had to share with you guys. And now I'd love to just open up the floor if there were any questions.
Yeah, we've started getting some questions coming in from some of the people that are following us today. One of the questions was, how much research did you actually have to put into your book as far as like eating disorders and things like that?
The eating disorder research was really important to me because I know that within the eating disorder community, there's a lot of talks about how often books about anorexia are actually kind of harmful because sometimes they can start to read as like how-to guides for people. And so it was really important to me to get the eating disorder research right and to make sure that there was detail, but not so much detail that it started to read like a way to help anorexic people like thrive in their eating disorder. And the book is also, it's really about the effect on the sibling more than the actual disease itself. So I did a lot of research. I read a few books, and then I was able to talk to a counselor who specializes in eating disorders. And then HarperCollins, the editor, actually had another counselor who specializes in eating disorders read over the book and give us feedback. And that was really helpful to me just because I think, especially when you're writing for young people, it's so important to get these kind of mental illnesses right, especially ones like anorexia, which are sometimes glamorized and seen as like a cool thing to have. I wanted to make sure to show the really gnarly side of it. And so, yeah, it was quite a bit of research, but it was fascinating. It was really, really interesting.
All right. So do you plan on continuing to write for middle school children?
Yes, I love middle grade books. Just whenever I try to write anything else, it always ends up sounding super middle grade-y. So I think I'm going to stick in that lane. I do have another middle grade book coming out next May called The K in Between, also through HarperCollins. So that's my next one. And then I'm kind of trying to work on a third one right now, but I'm letting it simmer. But middle grade books, again, I think because of the way that they end pointed towards hope, that's a really cool, important feature for me versus I like reading adult books, but sometimes they're so dark. I feel like I'm a 12-year-old at heart. Like I read so much middle grade literature, even when I go to the library, like I'm looking for me in the middle grade section. So yeah, I think I'll hang out in middle grade for a while, but I would also really love to write picture books one day, but that kind of intimidates me because I don't know how to do it. So maybe I'll take a class or something one day.
All right. I'm actually going to combine two questions together here. There's how do like when you're writing for the middle grade, how do you decide what's vocabulary and or subject matter is appropriate for kids in that range? Are you looking to make them look things up in the dictionary as they or and Google it as they read or and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's definitely not my goal to go like above a middle grader's reading level. That being said, like there's just a really wide range. So like when you say middle grade, it's like ages 8 to 12. Well, an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old are super different, but you can have 8-year-olds who are reading way above their grade level and then 12-year-olds who are, reading at a little bit of a lower level at that time. And so there's a really big range, but to get in the voice, I do a couple different things. First of all, we have a mother's helper who comes over and plays with my kids while I work, and she's 12, and she is a gold mine. I drive her home every time that she babysits for us, and she is just a gem she tells me all these stories about her friends. She tells me like what's really important to her. She broke down to me like how she was going to decorate her locker and how it's a really big deal how your locker is decorated, like things that I just wouldn't have thought of because I am 29. And so it was a while ago that I was 12 and I didn't have a cell phone. So things are really different for 12-year-olds now. And then I also watch some shows for middle graders, which aren't always, the vocabulary on there is not always going to be the most accurate, but it just kind of helps me get in the zone. So like I'll go on Disney Plus and watch I don't know, like an episode of Liv and Maddie or one of those like shows for middle schoolers. And that kind of helps me at least see, I think those are a little more aspirational. So like, okay, that's how 12-year-old girls kind of want their hair to look. That's how 12-year-old girls like kind of want to talk to guys. And so I do a lot of that to kind of get in the zone too. And then again, I just read a lot of middle grade books. And so I think I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of middle grade literature and what librarians are suggesting and what teachers are talking about. And so I just kind of dive really deep into the world of being a 12-year-old, but that's very fun for me and enjoyable.
Excellent. So we had someone else comment, not really a question, just a thank you. I love that you've made the ordinary extraordinary by featuring the characters of Wisconsin, or the character of Wisconsin. I think it helps make Wisconsin be more exciting. If it's cool enough to be in a book, maybe it's not so bad. I think many of us Wisconsin kids grow up wanting to leave, and only as adults realize how great it can be as a place. So thank you for that.
I completely agree. And I grew up totally being like, I thought Wisconsin was like, I don't know, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa. It's like all these places are so dull. And then, especially if you go spend time somewhere else, like in college, I had quite a few internships. I was in New York for a summer, I was in DC for a summer. And you really see a lot of what is lacking there that Wisconsin has. Just the type of people and the type of interactions and the way that people just want to get to know each other. And then you just really start to see the beauty in that. And yeah, I love Wisconsin.
Can you talk about your editing process a little bit? Was it ever tricky to let go of or change any of your initial ideas or writing, especially since a lot of it is, the stuff that you know as an individual?
5,000%. So when you first start editing, your editor sends you your book back and like an edit letter. And when I opened that for the first time, I was actually up here in Boulder Junction. I still remember I opened it up and I burst into tears like a 7-year-old, because I just felt like, oh my gosh, she's like ripping my book apart. She thinks it's horrible. And then my husband had to remind me, like, she bought it, so she doesn't think it's horrible, or she wouldn't have bought it. But yeah, it's always really hard to get feedback. My agent says a lot of the times, if you're not ready to get feedback, you're not ready to be an author. And I think that's true. So I always give myself 24 hours to freak out. That's kind of my time length. I'm like, I'm going to shut this off. And for a day, I'm going to wallow. I'm going to say all these bad things to myself, but I only get 24 hours. And then I need to put my big girl pants on and take some feedback and realize I'm an author, not an editor. Those are two different skills. Editors just see so much important stuff about your book. And so getting those edits, yeah, it was pretty tricky, but it was also really helpful because when you're writing, I think you kind of forget that like not everyone is in Wisconsin. So like I would say things like the terrace in Madison. Anyone in Wisconsin knows what I mean by the terrace in Madison. Instantly, you're thinking of the chairs and Babcock ice cream and all those great things. But someone in, I don't know, Ohio probably doesn't know what that means. And so that was kind of just a helpful thing to see my own blind spots. And I thought the editing was in particular really helpful with the eating disorder storyline, like we talked about, because that was so important to me. It was really good, again, to just see kind of my own blind spots, maybe where I had missed some research. So it is always hard emotionally, but you have to be able to put that in perspective and say, like your favorite book in the world, like The Hate U Give or Bloomability, like I mentioned, those went through edits. Like Angie Thomas didn't just get handed her manuscript back, like this is perfect. We all have to go through it. And so it's really hard, but I would just take long chunks of time at the coffee shop and go through it chunk by chunk. And we had to do that like 3 times. It was a lot of rounds of edits because I would miss things or my editor would miss things, and then it would go to copy editing. And a lot of people don't like copy editing because it's really nitpicky, but I loved it because I felt like I have never had someone go over my work with such a fine-tooth comb and like talk about, like, does Target have ices or slushies? Like that level of specific, like, how do you spell Cheez-Its? Does it have an E or no? And so I loved the copy editing process. And I actually do, if people are interested, I have a podcast about my entire writing and editing process. I did like 8 mini episodes. It's called Making a Middle Grade. And you can go listen. I have an entire episode on editing, and I interview my editor and my copy editor. And so that can kind of be helpful to see that perspective.
Wow, that's really involved. That's kind of cool that you've done that you kind of recorded that whole process.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of work, but I wanted it to be, I wanted to remember, and I wanted it to help other people. Because when I was starting this, I had no idea. I mean, I was Googling everything. I didn't know how any of publishing worked.
Sure. So when you're in a writing rhythm, what do your days look like as you are really into the meat of writing a book?
That's a good question. I actually am mostly a stay-at-home parent to my kids, and I only have childcare 2 mornings a week. And then this year, of course, I had like none. So it's kind of hard to find a really regular routine, but a couple things that help for me. First of all, I love to get out of my house. And so if I can arrange childcare, or if my husband's working from home, I can sneak out over nap time and go work at like a coffee shop. That is my jam for like writing environment. It's not completely silent. You're hearing espresso machines and like businessmen having meetings around you, but that like light chatter is really helpful for me. And then another thing that I do is I try not to read too much in my genre while I'm in a thick writing mode, because I just end up getting super down on myself. Like, this isn't that good compared to, what whoever is writing, Janae Marks or one of those other amazing middle grade authors. And so while I am a big reader, I try to, maybe I'm going to read a mystery book or something while I'm really in the meat of my middle grade one. And then a third thing that I do is I have a playlist for each book, and I make it right before I start writing, or maybe while I'm in like the first chapter. And I try to listen to that a lot, whether it's, I mean, that could be like while I'm washing dishes. It doesn't even have to be like while I'm writing, but to just kind of stay in that character's world. That's really, really helpful for me too. So I don't have like I'm going to write from 2 to 4 p.m. just because of how my mom life looks. But those are the kind of things I do to keep the momentum up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So going back to your podcast, can you tell us how to find your podcast?
Yeah, it's wherever you listen to podcasts. It's called Making a Middle Grade, and it goes over everything from I interviewed my agent to my copy editor to the marketing people, of how a book goes from an idea to a bookstore. And so it kind of starts in the beginning of me writing the book, and then me getting my agent, Alex, who's amazing. And then the book ended up going out on auction. And so I interviewed him and my editor about that whole process. And if you're interested in publishing, I think it will be helpful for you, because it shows you from all these different perspectives what goes into a book. Like, we even have an episode on like how the cover got made. Because again, it's just, I didn't know any of this, and you can Google it, but also people's experiences are so varied, and there's also a lot of like really out of date information out there too. And so this is a really recent project, and there's only 8 episodes, so you can breeze through it really quick. Yeah, Making a Middle Grade.
Okay. So going back to kind of the publishing process and things, someone wrote in, thanks for reading to us. I love being read to. And thanks for fleshing out the writing what you know. I've heard that forever. Appreciate your explanation of it. And can you speak about your process? Do you have an agent publishing? What kind of did you take a while to get published? How many rejections did you get? And that kind of thing.
1 million rejections. I have wanted to be an author since I was like, knew what books were. And so this was always my career dream. And anytime I worked towards anything else, in the back of my head, it was always like, well, that could be my day job, but at night I'm going to be an author. And then one day I'll just be an author. And so I wrote actually a different middle grade book right after college. I actually did a couple years of mission work in New Orleans, and I wrote a middle grade book while I was there. And then I queried that, and I actually ended up getting an agent pretty quickly. I heard stories of people taking like years and years to get a literary agent. That's not abnormal. But I ended up getting Alex, who's my phenomenal agent now, probably like, I mean, within 2 weeks. It was very fast. But then that book that he bought, he sent out to editors and nobody wanted it. And I mean, he probably sent it to, I don't know, like 30 people, like a lot. And that was really, really hard because I think I put myself on a pedestal a little bit of like, oh, I got an agent really fast. Like this book is going to be my New York Times bestseller. And that is not at all what happened. And that was super hard. But when you're finding an agent, it's really important to make sure you ask, like, well, what happens if you don't sell this book? Like, are we a one and done? And Alex was very clear, like, I want to develop your career. Like, I'm not in this for one book. I'm in this for you as a brand. And so after that book didn't go anywhere, Alex and I kind of sat down and fleshed out some ideas. And I ended up telling him, I did this free write about sister. I think I want to do something about sisters. I have a sister. I grew up with one. And that was the summer of the big eclipse, which is a big part of the book. And so the eclipse was on my mind. And so I was like, I don't know, something about sisters and this eclipse. And I've always been really interested in mental health. And he kind of helped me piece things together. But then he also gave me a lot of freedom, like, well, just go try to write and see what happens. And that's kind of my process. Again, like I said, I'm a pantser. So I need to sit and just type it out. And maybe it'll be terrible, but maybe it'll work. And so once we found something that worked, I sent it back to him and he was able to send that out to editors. And I would say maybe within like 2 months, we had 4 offers from editors. And so then it ends up going to an auction. And so your agent will tell your editors, like, bring your best deal to the table, talk to Claire on the phone, tell her, what edits you would make. Because like one of the editors who wanted it was like, wanted to change the whole ending. And I was like, well, I'm not really down with that. I don't care how much money you're going to give me. And so that's a really important part of the process. And so we ended up going with Alyssa Mealy at HarperCollins, and she's phenomenal. And I'm really glad how it all worked out. And it ended up being a 2-book deal. And so that's why The Kate in Between is coming out next year. And so I didn't have to go do that whole process. But for the book I'm trying to write now, like, nobody has paid me a dime for it. Nobody has said they wanted it. And so it's a whole different form of motivation to sit down and write it. So publishing is so different for every single person. But I would say the number one thing I would impress upon you is to just get an agent you're super comfortable with and who you feel like you can ask any question to, because you're going to have a lot of questions throughout the whole process, and it cannot be someone that you're kind of afraid of. It has to be someone you're tight with. So yeah.
All right. And then someone else is asking, what's been the best part about having this middle grade book out in the world? How's the feedback been different from than your nonfiction books?
That's a really interesting question. My fiction, so I didn't even mention this, but I have written a couple nonfiction books for Christian women. That's kind of like a side business that I have. And my fiction feels more personal, which throws people off because my nonfiction books tell a lot of my own life story and really personal things. But my fiction was always something that I was afraid for people to read. I didn't really like to talk about. I'm way more comfortable talking about my nonfiction. I'm a Christian speaker, so I'm kind of used to like talking about Jesus to all these people. I'm way less comfortable talking about like characters I made up in my head. And so it was really, really nerve-wracking to release it and to get feedback. And some feedback has been great, and some has been not great. And that's always the case with writing. But I think that it's just been harder to take with fiction because it feels more personal. But it feels phenomenal having it out in the world, especially when I hear from actual kids reading it. Because it's one thing to have, your moms, it's great, or like your friends, or even, professional book reviewers and librarians. That's all so great. But when you hear from a kid who really loved it, which I have a few times, like, that is what I waited my whole life for. And so I can't even put into words how amazing that feels. I mean, I truly feel like I'm living my dream job. So lots of heartache and lots of excitement too.
So the question that I have for you is how have you kept your creativity going through the whole COVID situation where we've got, people are all at home, obviously you've got little ones at home, and so how have you kept yourself kind of flowing that way?
It's been hard for sure. Especially I've been dealing with some sickness last few weeks. I'm pregnant with my third child, which is amazing, but I get really sick. And so that's been really tricky. And then during COVID, I didn't have childcare. And so you're kind of in survival mode, you're just making sure the kids are dressed and the bills are paid. And there's not a lot of like extra room for daydreaming, which is such an essential part of writing. But on the other hand, I think one of the marks of a professional writer is that you can write no matter the circumstance, and that the muse isn't going to knock on your door every day, and sometimes you just need to put your butt in the chair. And so for me, it's been just a lot of discipline and making myself write even on days I don't feel like it. And some days what you write is crap, but it's kind of like I said earlier, writers in general need to chill out. Like, we're a neurotic bunch, and sometimes I just want to tell people, like, you're not curing cancer. Like, you're fine. Like, you can write something that's bad and no one is going to die. Like, just sit and just try to write something. And if it's terrible, that's better than writing nothing, because you can always go back and edit it. And so the ways that I've stayed really creative are just giving myself a lot of slack and saying, like, I'm not going to get as much done this year as I would. And that's just reality. But also people still need stories, and we're all going through a lot of emotions right now. So how can I, pull from that well, and just reminding myself that, like, I'm very lucky that this is my job, and I could complain about the muse not being there, or I could, set my butt in a chair and write, which is what a lot of people would like to do and can't. So I can be grateful. And so those are kind of how I've gotten through COVID. I'm ready for COVID to be over, and it doesn't really look like we're headed that way. So especially in Wisconsin. And so I think the year ahead, I have a more permanent childcare situation set up. So that's been pretty helpful. Hopefully one of these days I stop throwing up from morning sickness, and then I can kind of focus more on that third book.
Well, congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
third child. It's really kind of cool. Someone was just commenting that thank you for continuing to write. Books have gotten us through COVID big time. So that's really, really helpful. Give your people a couple of seconds here to see if anybody else has any other questions. In the meantime, I'll remind people that the bookstore in Appleton has copies of the books from the book festival available for purchase. Otherwise, there's bookshop.org to buy the books online and benefit the festival. And you also have a website. Can you remind us of your website to find out more information about you?
Yep. It's just at claireswinarski.com. There's all my social media links. Everything is just housed on that website at claireswinarski.com.
Okay, and so that has all of your information and future books coming out and things like that. So that is fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope to read great things about you in the future.
Thank you. It was a ton of fun.
All right, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.